Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. For any of you guys who are new here, my name is Sean Anderson and I am a first year anesthesiology resident in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I have vlogged almost every single day in residency so far. But even though every single day has been documented on this YouTube channel, I wanted to take a second and really look back on this experience and what I've learned so far. I've got Eddie here behind the camera and I have no idea what questions he has ready, but let's get started.
All right, first question. So how was it transitioning from being a medical student into a first-year resident?
I think that was actually the hardest part of the beginning of residency, was switching away from the student mindset to the doctor mindset, because I've been a student for the past 10 years before I started working as a resident. And so I never truly felt like I had a role in the healthcare team, but as a resident, you have one of the biggest roles in the healthcare team. So it did take me a little bit to ease into the doctor mentality, but I think after the first month, I kind of got used to it. And if anything, I was inviting it. Like, it started to feel good to call myself doctor and act like one. I actually remember the first time I introduced myself to a patient on my first day, I walked in and said, "Hey there, I'm Sean," instead of, "Hey, I'm Dr. Anderson." And I remember thinking I was so stupid for it. But that's only because it felt unnatural, but now it feels very natural.
So going into your intern year, what did you think it was going to be like versus how it was actually?
Honestly, I thought that I was going to have no sleep and I was just going to be working the entire time. And yeah, I've actually missed out on a lot of sleep and I have spent a lot of that time working. But what I wasn't expecting was how many fun times and memories that I was able to make throughout the year. Like, even though I was spending all my time in the hospital pretty much, I was still able to do a bunch of other fun stuff, like take trips to California, Alaska, compete in content creator competitions, grow a YouTube channel, run a marathon, run a Spartan trifecta. I think that was extremely unexpected because I just thought I was gonna have time for none of that kind of stuff.
So are there any horror stories that you heard about intern year before you went into it that turned out to be true, or any that turned out to be false?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm a transitional year resident, which means that I rotate through a variety of specialties during my intern year. And the first one that I had as a fresh new resident was surgery. And so many people warned me about this surgery rotation. In fact, a lot of the senior residents were like, "Dang dude, that sucks that that's your first rotation." And so my friend DePaul and I were super nervous to get started, especially as two residents that were doing anesthesiology and radiology. Surgery was like the last thing we wanted to do. And so we were absolutely terrified going in. But that rotation ended up being probably one of my favorite rotations ever. And we actually really ended up loving operating as residents versus as medical students, where you really don't feel like you have a role and you don't get to do a lot during the surgery. We actually ended up enjoying surgery a lot because we just had more of a role and got to do a lot more during the cases. And I mean, obviously it helped having one of your best friends with you the entire time to kind of share those long hours, those 4 a.m. wake up days. But that ended up just being probably one of my fondest memories in residency so far.
So are there any horror stories that turned out to be true?
So one of the things that turned out to be true was when people were telling me that when you start off as a resident, you are going to second guess or even triple guess literally every little thing that you order. That was totally true. I would spend 10 minutes sometimes thinking about if I could order Tylenol for a patient, and worrying about, like, what if I kill someone by giving them Tylenol, even though we can just buy it over the counter and people take tons of it every day and they have no problems. I would sit there for like ever thinking, like, can this patient have Tylenol? And it would be someone who came in 20 something years old and they came in for like a knee injury or something like that. And yeah, that was totally true. But now that I'm 11 months into residency, I don't spend nearly as much time having to really think about certain decisions because I've just gotten so much better at my clinical decision making and realizing what things I can and can't do and what things I am and am not confident with. But that was totally a real thing at the beginning of residency.
So I've heard a lot of first year residents are also really nervous about running their first code. What was your experience like?
Yeah, that was definitely scary. I remember showing up to my first code, and as a medical student, you're like kind of just an extra body in the room, really just someone else to give chest compressions to the patient. And as a resident, you are now someone that people are going to look to for direction during a code. And yeah, I was afraid of that happening, and it happened very early on in residency. And not gonna lie, I was probably like pretty useless during that code. I think my first code, I actually did just stand in the corner and observe, and maybe I threw some chest compressions. But as the year progressed, I started to feel more confident when stuff like that would happen. And just a couple months later, I was now the person who was intubating the patient during the code. And yeah, it went from being something that was very terrifying to something that I felt like I could be actionable during. And again, that's just a growth that cannot happen until you're in those positions.
So another question that I know a lot of people are probably curious about: how's the resident salary?
So I'm not gonna lie, residency salary is pretty cheeks. It's pretty bad, but I will say it is a very good feeling to go from not making any money as a medical student and as a pre-med making basically scraps to work clinical jobs to at least earning somewhat of a salary as a resident, where you know that you're getting a bi-weekly paycheck that can take care of your bills, and you can start saving money and investing some and start kind of building something of a net worth. I will say that was a good feeling, but if you break it down into an hourly, which I've done in some of my other videos, it's pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie. So I talk a lot on this channel about the things that we don't necessarily learn in our training, especially when it comes to finances. And one of the biggest things that I wish that I knew earlier was how to start building credit the right way. And that's why I'm excited to partner up with Chime for this video. In fact, one of the features that I've been using is their Credit Builder Secured Visa credit card. It's a secured card that helps you build credit without taking on unnecessary risk. You decide how much to move into your secured account, and that amount becomes your spending limit. Then when you turn on the safer credit building feature, your payment is automated and on time every single month. For me, this is a very low stress, easy way to build credit when you're just spending money on everyday items. Things like groceries, Netflix, or the very necessary Starbucks. The problem with a lot of people who first open up a credit account is that they use those spending limits and then aren't able to necessarily pay it back. But with the Secure Credit Builder, you get rid of all of that risk. So if you're just starting medical school, residency, or just looking to rebuild your financial foundation, I think that something like Chime is a really awesome step in the right direction. And I highly recommend you don't wait till later to take control of your finances. So make sure to check out Chime by either clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code here on the screen. And thank you so much again to Chime for sponsoring this video.
So now that you've been earning a consistent paycheck, do you feel like you've become a little bit more financially savvy?
Yeah. Definitely. In fact, that was one of my big priorities coming into residency. Full transparency, guys, I am in a very, very privileged position where I was able to enter residency without any sort of medical school debt, and I was even able to live in my family home for this first year with the kind of strategy in mind that I was going to be able to save up as much money as possible before I moved to San Diego, which, as you guys know, is a very expensive place. But although I am very privileged to be in this position, I wanted to make sure that it didn't go to waste. So I've been definitely doing my best to be as financially savvy and responsible as possible. For example, as soon as residency started, I set up automations for things like investing into my Vanguard, moving money to a high yield savings account, and basically just creating a financial plan that would allow me to really maximize the potential of my salary. In fact, through my high yield savings account, I was able to set up different buckets for expenses that I knew were going to be coming up. For example, the first thing I did was top off an emergency fund in case something were to happen. Like, for example, I just cracked my windshield a few weeks ago and I was able to cover the expense with that emergency fund. I also set aside a different fund for moving that I knew would be able to cover first month's rent and a security deposit, as well as any moving things I needed, like a U-Haul, new furniture. And then I had buckets for things like traveling, where when I went to Alaska, I was able to just pull the money from that bucket. And then of course you have to pay yourself a little bit, so I just have a regular savings bucket just in case something comes up that I didn't have money set aside for that I really want. I think by setting up these various automations, investments, and savings goals, it allowed me to create a systematic way that I approach my income that will set me up for success in the future.
So I think a lot of people are wondering, What were your most challenging rotations so far?
That's a good question. I would say the hardest rotation so far in residency has been my ICU rotations. And I thought it was so challenging that I decided to do an extra month of it as an elective.
What about ICU made it so challenging?
ICU is essentially the highest level of care in the entire hospital. And so you are up there dealing with the most critical patients that are around. And because of that, there's this level of attentiveness that you have to have in order to deliver optimal patient care. So I was there 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and almost every single minute was spent doing something related to patient care. So for example, I'd be seeing my current patients and making sure that they're getting the treatments and care that they need. But then all of a sudden I could have to run all the way across the hospital to a code for a patient that I've never met before. And then on top of that, you have to do a lot of procedures in the ICU. So 1 minute you can be working on your notes and then literally a couple of minutes later going and doing a central line. And so essentially your brain and your body are just on for the entire shift.
Do you feel like medical school adequately prepared you for that?
Honestly, I think medical school prepared me for what it was going to be like, but I don't think anything can prepare you for the actual act of being a doctor in that setting until you have to do it and you have the weight of your decisions on your shoulders. And honestly, that's just the agenda of residency. That's why we're doing it.
So how did you deal with failure or making mistakes?
I think early on, I told myself that the point of residency was to fail and make mistakes that I didn't want to make as an attending, because this is the only time you have in your entire career to be supervised and low-key working under someone else's license. So I told myself that I was going to only become better if I take advantage of that and allow myself to fail, because I'd rather fail now than fail later. And I think a lot of residents need to have that mindset, because I've met a lot of residents that are not forgiving of themselves when they make mistakes and they get really hard on themselves. But like, this is the point. This is why we're doing it. I'm not expected to know everything as a first-year resident. I'm not even expected to know everything as a third-year resident, right? How can we be hard on ourselves? And I think that that mindset has really kept a mental and emotional intelligence and stable state that has really helped me throughout this intern year.
So are there any mistakes or failures that you'd feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, honestly, I probably have made a mistake or had some sort of failure like at least once a day, or probably like once a week. And I would say like my dumbest mistake so far, especially as a resident that is going to be a proceduralist, was this one time that I was opening up the kit for a line that I was doing, and I hadn't done anything with the patient yet. I was literally just prepping the field. I was prepping the sterile field where I had my kit laying out. And essentially, if any of you guys have ever, started lines, whether it was an art line, central line, whatever, I essentially had like my needle that I was going to be using to get access. And it comes with this like plastic protecting part. That way, obviously, when you open the kit, you don't like stab yourself with it, which is the goal, right? But I was basically trying to take the plastic part off of the needle. And normally when you do this, you can even just with one hand pop off the plastic and then pull your needle out. And I tried to do that, and I noticed that the plastic wasn't like popping off when I was just doing it with my right hand. So I put the plastic part in my left hand so that I could try to pull it off. And that was my first mistake. If you notice that your materials are not working the way that they should, you should immediately stop, take a step back, and ask yourself, why is this not going the way it normally does? But instead, I decided to try to add some extra force to get the plastic piece off of the needle, and I found myself pulling on it. And basically, I pulled pretty darn hard, and it did pop off with a lot of effort, but because I was trying to not fling my arm back, as soon as I felt it pop off, I actually drove the needle back forward and went past the plastic part, and I actually skewered myself in the finger. Now, this was like a pretty large gauge needle, so I was just gushing blood. And it hurt pretty darn bad. Like, I don't think I've ever been stabbed like that before. But luckily it was a very sterile needle, and I had already sterilized myself prior to being ready for that procedure, and it never touched the patient. In fact, I wasn't even anywhere close to the patient, and all the things went right for like if I was going to stab myself with a needle. But I do feel really stupid about it because, again, it was a totally preventable thing where if I just had decided, hey, something doesn't feel right about this, let me stop, it wouldn't have happened. And now moving forward, especially as someone who's doing anesthesiology, I know that if any of my tools do not feel right for whatever reason, I'm not going to use them. I'm going to go get a new kit. I'm going to go get new supplies because it is not worth the risk of something going wrong like that. It was ultimately a very good learning experience and it didn't really even leave a scar, so that's a dub.
Did your co-residents and attendings give you a lot of flack for that?
Oh yeah. Actually, I will say that they were super supportive of it and a lot of them were sharing their stories about things they've done, especially my attending. So that was really nice of them, but they still kind of like poked a little bit of fun, which you have to. I even was joking about it like an hour later.
Speaking of which, what were your relationships like with your co-residents, your seniors, your attendings, and just other hospital staff in general?
Honestly, that's probably been one of the things I've enjoyed the most of residency so far was the relationships I've been able to build with my colleagues. Before I started residency, a lot of people would tell me that you're going to get very close with your cohort, and that was true. A lot of your co-interns become close to you because you're all doing this thing that only you can relate to each other on. You can't relate to your friends and family about it, and so you kind of turn to each other to get guidance and to have an ear to listen to you when things are not necessarily going your way. And that just builds the type of relationships that you can't really get anywhere else. And that's been one of the most fun parts for me. I've really enjoyed all of the attendings I've gotten to work with. I feel like I've gotten to learn from them in different ways. Even people in the hospital that aren't directly involved with the residency program, like the nurses, the physical therapists, the radiology techs, the SLPs. I feel like there's so many people in the hospital that I've just gotten to know because you're all there to care for the patients and you have to work together in various ways. It's been very rewarding and a lot of fun, and I'm definitely going to miss a lot of them when I move to San Diego next month.
Do you feel like you're treated differently now than when you're a medical student? And if so, in what ways?
I would say yes. And this kind of goes back to what I said earlier about the student versus doctor title. I think when you have student in your title, you're always going to be looked at as a student. And I feel like sometimes you are treated like you don't necessarily have a role in the healthcare team. But when you have doctor in front of your name, people don't look at you as someone who maybe is going to become a doctor. They look at you as someone who is a doctor and someone who needs to become good at what they're doing so that they can have a successful career. And so I have noticed a big difference with the way that I get treated as a resident versus as a medical student. But I think it's a two-way street because people are only going to respect you if you give respect. I think that there are a lot of residents who have given us maybe a bad reputation because they maybe come in and feel like they're higher on some imaginary totem pole than other people in the healthcare team, versus a more collaborative mindset where you're taking more of a multidisciplinary approach to patient care and, again, really treating every member of the healthcare team with the respect that you want to receive.
Speaking of which, do you have any advice for working smoothly with your co-residents, your attendings, nurses, etc.?
I think my best advice is to honestly just be a team player. Everyone just wants to have a smooth day and wants to take care of the patient. And I think you need to come in with the mindset that you're there to work together and you're also there to learn. So things like being willing to accept feedback and education from your attendings when your own learning is maybe lacking in certain areas, or helping the nurses with bedside things like turning over a patient or going and grabbing things that they need. As a resident, you are not above any part of patient care. And so coming in with that mindset, I think will just make you more of a team player.
Speaking of advice, what advice do you have for incoming residents?
My main piece of advice is to not allow residency to dictate your entire life. I've had such a great year. In fact, I would say that this year has been one of the best years of my life. And it's been full of not only educational experiences from residency, but it's also been full of memories and accomplishments throughout the entire year. And that's because I prioritized those things. And I told myself coming in that I was not going to stop living my life just because of this path. Because of that, I've been able to do so many things that I didn't think I'd be doing as a resident. And so I urge you guys to continue any hobbies you have, any passions you have. Keep up with your sports, keep up with your friends, your family, because life isn't going to stop just because you're a resident. It's going to keep on going, and you don't want to look back and regret anything.
So now that you're finishing up your first year as a doctor, how do you feel about your decision to become a doctor and specifically an anesthesiologist?
This was 100% the right path to go down. I have loved every second of this, and I am very happy that I chose this path. Also, anesthesia is the best specialty, so if you're wondering what you should go into, definitely go into gas. Honestly, guys, residency is ultimately what you make of it. And even though it can suck sometimes, you kind of just have to embrace the suck. On the other side of discomfort is growth, and on the other side of fear is accomplishment. And I think residency puts you in such a good position to conquer some of your fears and to overcome some of your discomfort. And I wouldn't trade this experience for anything else. So make sure you go into it with a good mindset, and just remember to have fun and work hard. If any of you guys are residents, make sure to comment some of your experiences in the comment section below. Or if you guys have any other questions about my experience so far as an intern, you guys can comment those questions below and maybe we'll do a part 2. But I really want to thank you guys for joining me on my intern year so far. It's definitely been an experience having almost every single second of it on YouTube, but I wouldn't trade that for the world, and it's been very fulfilling to be able to share this journey with you guys. Anyway, as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.